Hi poetry lovers, welcome to my channel Bella Poetry. My name is Bella and I love beautiful poetry. In this segment of our second series, The Best Love Poetry and the Poets That Painted, we will discuss the life and love poetry of an American poet and journalist who was known for her poetry that was tinged with a little bit of eroticism, quite oblique, but still not quite appropriate for the times when she lived and wrote. Ella Wilcox was born on November 5th, 1850 in Johnstown, Wisconsin. Her parents were Marcus and Sarah. They both considered themselves intellectuals. They had 4 children, and Ella was the youngest of 4 children. She was very gifted. Her mother, Sarah, considered herself very smart. She felt that her life, her fate didn't give her the life she deserved. And she wanted her daughter, Ella, to become more than she was. And so she encouraged her and supported her literary endeavors as much as she did with the other children, but especially Ella because she was extremely gifted. All her children, all their 4 children, became avid readers and very capable writers. Marcus was a businessman. Actually, he was in show business. He failed, and he decided to buy a farm in the north of Wisconsin, in Madison. So he moved his family to Madison. Now, Wilcox's literary abilities started to show themselves when she was very young. She started writing poetry at the age of 8, and at the age of 14, she actually published her first poem in New York Mercury. Actually, it's a very interesting story about how she started writing. The family was not rich. They lived on the farm. Ella was very bored. She needed kind of stimulation, intellectual stimulation around her. And the only source of it at that time were the magazines that the family received, mainly the New York Mercury, where she published her first poem. But they were not rich, as I said before, and so the subscription stopped at some time and was not renewed. So Ella's friend Jean suggested to her that she send her poems in exchange of magazine promotions and gifts and free issues, and that's what Ella did. She sent out her poetry, and she received a lot of different issues from different magazines. Unfortunately, the poetry that she's written that she wrote from the age of 8 to the age of almost 18 all got lost. But she became, by the end, she graduated from high school. She became quite popular in her community because her poetry appeared in many different magazines and periodicals. So people actually recognized her, knew her, and loved her poetry. From 1867 to 1868, Ella Wilcox attended the University of Wisconsin. She stayed there for just 1 year, and this was the only year when she did not write any poetry. I think that's why she left the university at the end of 1868 school year, because she felt that it takes away from her productivity as a poet. She couldn't write when she was studying. She didn't have time. So she wanted to devote more time to writing, and she was extremely prolific in the years to come. She published her poems in the beginning for $3, $5, $10. She really liked it, and I think it was also motivation for her to continue writing and to be as productive as she was. So in 1872, 4 years later, her first book of poetry called The Drops of Water was published. It mostly consisted of poems about abstinence, poems of religious and moral nature. And then A year later, in 1873, she published another book of poetry called Maureen, and these poems in this book were more of sentimental and emotional nature. But her third book of poetry really made her famous. This book of poetry was called The Poems of Passion. The first publisher that she submitted this poetry to rejected them. And the next publisher picked it up, and he did a very wise thing, because this particular book of poetry sold in 2 years 60,000 copies, which is a lot for a book of poetry. A year later, Ella Wilcox married a businessman, a silver merchant by the name of Robert M. Wilcox. They only met 3 times, and they got married after 3 times that they met, which seems a little strange, but in actuality, this marriage was very successful. They loved each other very much, and they lived together for almost 30 years. During this time, they were basically very happy, and Ella Wilcox devoted herself to wifely duties, but it didn't interfere with her productivity. She remained very prolific through 1890s and the 1900s. Some of the collections that followed were titled Men, Women, and Emotions in 1891, then Poems of Sentiment published in 1906, and World Voices published in 1918. She also wrote 2 autobiographies. Her first autobiography was written in 1905, and the next one, the second, was written in 1918, shortly, a few months before her death. She also penned 2 novels, which were called A Double Life in 1890 and A Woman of the World in 1904. Robert and Ella Wilcox were very much into spiritualism. They believed in reincarnation, in life after death, and they promised each other that whoever dies first will try to contact the person that was left behind. And in 1916, Robert Wilcox unfortunately passed away, which left Ella devastated because she loved him very much. She tried to contact him. She claimed that she did contact his spirit, and that he urged her to travel to Allied camps in France and to tour there, to read her poetry and to lecture. And that's exactly what she did. She traveled to France, she lectured, and she read her poetry in 1918. But while in France, she was diagnosed with cancer, and she passed away on October 31st, 1919, yes, at the age of 68. Her final words in her autobiography, The Worlds and I, are, "From this mighty storehouse of God and hierarchies of spiritual beings, we may gather wisdom and knowledge and receive light and power as we pass through this preparatory room of earth, which is only one of the innumerable mansions in our Father's house. Think on these things." Wilcox was also a vegetarian and an avid advocate of animal rights. As I usually do after I finish the segment, I read the quotes by the authors, and my favorite quotes by Ella Wilcox are: the first one, "A weed is but an unloved flower." I thought it was very interesting quote. If she only knew that today weed would actually be a very loved flower. But at that time, I'm sure she referred to weeds in the garden that we pull out. The second quote was taken from her most famous poem called Solitude. One time she traveled on a train to an inaugural ball in New York, and she saw this woman, that a widow dressed in black, sitting and crying. She approached her, she talked to her, and as a result, she wrote this poem called Solitude. And the next 4 lines that I'll read to you are from this poem. Laugh and the world laughs with you. Weep and you weep alone. For the sad old earth must borrow its mirth, but has trouble enough of its own. Very beautiful quote. And I'm so happy that finally we came to her poetry. And I will read to you my favorite love poem by Ella Wilcox called I Love You. I love your lips when they're wet with wine and red with wild desire. I love your eyes when the love light lies, lit with a passionate fire. I love your arms when the warm white flash touches mine in a fond embrace. I love your hair when the strands enmesh your kisses against my face. Not for me the cold, calm kiss of a virgin's bloodless love. Not for me the saint's white bliss, nor the heart of a spotless dove. But give me the love that so freely gives and laughs at the whole world's blame. With your body so young and warm in my arms, it sets my poor heart aflame. So kiss me, sweet, with your warm wet mouth, still fragrant with ruby wine, and say with a fervor born in the south that your body and soul are mine. Clasp me close in your warm young arms while the pale stars shine above, and we'll live our whole young lives away in the joys of a living love. A beautiful, beautiful poem. And then the second poem, I believe, was written much later, and it's called Friendship After Love. After the fierce midsummer all ablaze has burned itself to ashes and expires in the intensity of its own fires, there come the mellow, mild St. Martin's days, crowned with the calm of peace, but sad with haze. So after love has led us till he tires of his own throes and torments and desires, comes large-eyed friendship with a restful gaze. He beckons us to follow, and across cold verdant vales we wander free from care. Is it a touch of frost lies in the air? Why are we haunted with a sense of loss? We do not wish the pain back or the heat, and yet, these days are incomplete. What a beautiful, beautiful poem. So this poem brings us to the end of this segment. In our next segment, we will discuss the life and the love poetry of Bengali poet Sarojini Naidu. Please join us. Thank you very much for joining us for this segment. I hope you enjoyed it. Please don't forget to like and to subscribe. Your support is extremely important to us. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. Bye-bye.